The story will be told from the perspective of the main female character. My name is Amelia, and I'm 31 years old. Last week, I was at my cousin's wedding rehearsal dinner. My aunt stood up in front of 80 people and announced to everyone that I wasn't actually her daughter. She had a wide smile on her face as she proudly informed the guests that she was covering the cost of the $140,000 wedding, but the truth was far different. The money she claimed as her own had actually been coming from me, quietly and secretly, for the past 10 years. Every head in that room slowly turned toward me. I could almost feel the pity in their eyes. Soft whispers floated through the air, and the pressure of their stares felt heavy against my chest. But instead of shrinking under their attention, I simply smiled back. There was something I understood that none of them did. Have you ever felt like you didn't exist inside your own family? If you have, tell me about it. Write a comment and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is where you are right now. I'd love to know who is part of this community. The atmosphere on that luxurious yacht in Nugget felt thick and heavy. The air carried the fragrance of costly floral arrangements mixed with the salty mist coming off the ocean waves. My aunt was standing proudly at the head of a long mahogany dining table. The silk fabric of her dress shimmered beneath the glow of crystal chandeliers, glistening like a thin layer of oil floating on water. She looked every bit like a woman born into old wealth as she lifted her glass toward the crowd of 80 guests. These people represented the highest tier of the island's social elite. Meanwhile, I sat quietly in my chair. At 31 years old, I was a lawyer who handled major court cases. For an entire decade, I had been the hidden support system quietly holding this family together. I watched the corners of my aunt's lips twist into a cruel and rehearsed smile when she publicly labeled me a parasite and an outsider in front of everyone. My heart didn't shatter the way people might expect. Instead, it hardened. It felt like it had transformed into solid stone. The anger rising inside me wasn't loud or explosive. It was quiet, cold, and precise. I gently placed my glass on the white tablecloth. The soft tap of the glass touching the wood echoed louder in my mind than any of the whispers around me. While murmurs spread across the room, I didn't cry. I didn't question her. I wasn't going to give them the drama they were expecting. Instead, I calmly pushed my chair back and stood up. The movement clearly unsettled my uncle, who sat beside my aunt. He kept his gaze down and refused to meet my eyes. Without saying a word, I stepped out onto the yacht's deck. The wind blowing from the Atlantic was sharp and freezing, but it felt honest compared to the fake smiles and polite lies inside the cabin. I reached into my bag and pulled out my phone. My hands were steady, perfectly controlled. I moved with the same careful precision I used when filing legal motions in court. Opening my banking app, I noticed the time. It was exactly 11:55 p.m. My eyes rested on the line labeled Family Trust. That single line had been swallowing $4,500 from my paycheck every month for 10 years straight. I tapped the option that said Cancel Recurring Transfer, then I pressed Confirm. There was no guilt, no hesitation. If anything, it felt like finally closing the books on a terrible financial investment. For 10 years, I had quietly funded their version of family life. I had paid for luxuries they never worked for themselves. In that moment, I realized it had all been nothing more than a subscription service, and the free trial had officially ended. Next, I opened our family group chat. My aunt, my uncle, and my cousin were all members. My cousin, the beloved princess whose $140,000 wedding was currently being paid for by my overtime hours and late nights at the office. I typed 5 simple words: "The kindness subscription has expired." I pressed send and watched the gray typing bubbles appear. I didn't wait for them to turn blue. Instead, I blocked every single one of them. From inside the yacht, I could faintly hear the band playing a slow waltz. They were still celebrating a future they assumed I would continue paying for. Leaning against the railing, I looked out at the dark stretch of the Nantucket horizon. This wasn't a breakdown, it was accounting. My kindness had been a luxury, and tonight they had spent far more of it than they deserved. In my mind, I was declaring emotional bankruptcy on their behalf. I checked my watch again. It was 12:03 a.m. In only 6 minutes, I had ended 10 years of servitude. Through the glass doors of the yacht, I could see my aunt staring down at her phone. I watched the exact moment her expression changed from proud and victorious to completely pale. That calm, aristocratic confidence vanished instantly, but I didn't wait for her to rush outside. I didn't stay around to hear excuses or more lies. Instead, I walked toward the back of the boat where the small water taxi waited to take passengers to shore. I stepped aboard, ready to move toward a different life, a place where I no longer had to pay for the privilege of existing. I sat in the back of the small water taxi as it drifted away from the yacht. The quiet vibration of the motor sent a gentle tremor through the wooden floor beneath my feet. That number $540,000 echoed inside my mind. It was no longer just a number on a screen. It represented 10 full years of my life converted into cash. Over that decade, I had transferred exactly $540,000 into the family trust. That amount could easily buy a luxury condo in downtown Chicago. Most people don't even earn that much in their entire lifetime, but to my aunt and uncle, it was simply the price I had to pay for their tolerance. 10 years ago, I had been 21 years old. I stood beneath pouring rain at my parents' funeral, clutching a soggy tissue while the world felt like it was collapsing beneath my feet. My mom and dad were gone. That night, my aunt pulled me aside and spoke to me in a soft, sympathetic voice that sounded supportive, but was really manipulative. She told me my parents had left behind a mountain of humiliating debt. According to her, the family's money had been drained. She claimed she and my uncle were risking their own savings just to keep my parents' reputation from being dragged through bankruptcy court. Back then, I believed every word. I was grieving, alone, and desperate for a sense of belonging. So when she said I needed to help repay those debts for the sake of the family, I didn't question her. In fact, I thanked her. I thanked her for allowing me the chance to work endlessly to repay a debt that years later I would learn had never existed at all. That was the moment my life as their secret ATM began. I moved to Chicago and accepted a job as a junior lawyer at a prestigious firm. Then the routine started. My apartment was a high-rise studio in the city, a sleek glass box floating high above the streets. It was modern and expensive, but it felt hollow. It looked like the perfect home for a successful young attorney, yet it never felt like a place where someone truly lived. I wore tailored suits to project confidence in courtrooms, but my apartment remained empty. No photographs decorated the walls, no rugs softened the cold floors. There was only a desk stacked with legal documents and a single espresso machine. Sometimes late at night, I would lie in bed staring up at the plain white ceiling of my expensive prison and ask myself what I had done wrong. Why was I the one constantly sacrificing while my cousin's life looked like a non-stop celebration? She was 4 years younger than me. The golden child who never needed to understand the value of money because she was always spending mine. While I worked 80-hour weeks fighting my way toward partnership, she was posting pictures from vacations in Italy and shopping trips along Fifth Avenue. One post still stands out clearly in my memory. 3 years ago, she uploaded a photo holding a designer handbag worth $3,500. That same month, my aunt had called me in tears, begging for $3,500 to cover an emergency medical bill. The caption under my cousin's photo read, "Blessed to have parents who spoil me." I stared at that picture from my cold, dark apartment. For a moment, it felt like the air was being squeezed out of my lungs, but I said nothing. I kept being useful. A therapist might say I was just trying to survive. When you grow up in a toxic environment, you learn that being needed is often the only way to remain accepted. I wasn't purchasing their love. I was buying time so they wouldn't abandon me. My life was like a fragile house made of cards, a prison without visible bars, one whose walls I built myself using guilt and obligation. My aunt constantly reminded me how fortunate I was that they hadn't thrown me out onto the street after my parents died. For years, I believed that being needed meant being loved. I thought that if I gave enough money and acted as their safety net, one day they would finally treat me like a real daughter. I was wrong. To them, my worth existed only in how useful I was. I wasn't family, I was income. The contrast between our lives was brutal. While I debated whether I could afford a winter coat, they used my money to install granite countertops in their Nantucket home. While I skipped dentist appointments to save cash, my cousin was planning a $140,000 wedding. I looked down at my hands in the dim light of the boat. They were steady. For 10 years, I had been the invisible foundation supporting their social status. I had funded the illusion that they were wealthy, but tonight, that foundation had collapsed. My aunt's smug smile had been the final push, the sharp edge that finally cut through the chains I had worn for so long. She stood there in a dress worth more than 3 of my monthly payments and called me an outsider. She used the money I earned through exhausting work as a tool to humiliate me. She still believed I was the broken 21-year-old girl desperate for love. What she didn't realize was that she was dealing with a lawyer who spends every day dismantling people far more powerful than a bitter ant standing on a borrowed yacht. As the boat got closer to Thedok, I realized my silence wasn't a good thing. It was my cage. Tonight, I didn't just leave a party. I left the role they gave me. I wasn't their cash cow anymore. I wasn't their problem. I was the one who had all the proof of their lies for 10 years. The air was freezing now, but I didn't zip up my coat. I wanted to feel the cold. I wanted it to burn away the last 10 years of doing what I was told. My kindness was a resource they had drained until there was nothing left. I was done being the victim. I was ready to be the person who checks the books, and the audit of the family was just getting started. The morning sun over the water didn't feel warm, it just made everything look too clear. I sat on my hotel balcony and watched the fog move off the ocean while my phone kept vibrating on the glass table. My aunt called 52 times. My uncle called 17 times. I had dozens of texts that started out sounding confused and ended with them being totally furious. I didn't pick up once. I just went back to my laptop. My anger wasn't loud. It was like I was just doing math. I watched my aunt throw the first punch. She posted a black and white photo on Instagram of her and my cousin looking like their world had ended. The caption was a total lie. It said, "It breaks my heart that some people care more about money than family. My daughter's big day is being ruined by greed. Please pray for us during this hard time." I stared at the screen and felt a cold smile on my face. She wasn't upset about what she did. She was just shocked that I stopped paying her bills. In the comments, the rich people from Nantucket were already talking. "I'm so sorry," one person wrote. "Some people forget who raised them," said another. I could almost smell their panic through the computer screen. It was a stronger smell than the salt in the air. My aunt knew the people she hired for the $140,000 wedding wanted their final checks by the end of the week, without my $4,500 monthly payment. Her fake old money life was about to hit a brick wall. I grabbed my phone, but not to call her. I called the family's money guy, Robert. His voice sounded really stressed when he picked up. "Amelia, your aunt is saying there's a technical glitch with your automatic payments," Robert said. "She's demanding that I manually push the wedding money through the system." "That isn't going to happen, Robert," I told him. My voice was flat and steady. "I'm turning this family fight into a professional audit. I've already talked to an accounting firm in Chicago. I want a line-by-line list of every single cent I sent to that trust over the last 10 years. Amelia, she's your family." Robert started to say, "No, Robert," I cut him off. "She's a client who spent too much money. My kindness was a luxury. She used it for 10 years and now I'm calling in the debt." I hung up and wrote a formal notice. I didn't sound like a hurt niece. I sounded like a lawyer. I sent one email to my aunt and copied the senior partner at my firm. The message was short. "You have 72 hours to give me a certified record of the $540,000 I put into the Horizon Trust. If you don't show me how this money paid off my parents' debt, I am filing a lawsuit for fraud and breach of duty." I hit send. Inside my laptop, the screen was glowing with facts and numbers. This wasn't a breakdown, it was an audit of her soul, and I knew I was going to find a lot of lies. The truth didn't come out with a loud bang. It arrived in a dry 50-page PDF from a group of accountants. I sat in my office in Chicago. The city outside was blurry because of the rain on my window. I watched 10 years of my life change from a sacrifice into a crime. I had spent 10 years paying for a ghost. My aunt told me my parents died with a mountain of debt. She used that to make me a slave for her money, but the bank records and the legal papers from 10 years ago told a different story. It was a story about a robbery. The accountant marked one specific payout from 2 weeks after the funeral. It was a life insurance policy for $1,200,000. The person who was supposed to get that money was me. I stared at the digital scan of the claim form. At the bottom, there was a signature that looked like mine, but the way the letters landed was wrong. The pressure on the pen was too heavy. It was a fake. My aunt and uncle didn't just take my paychecks. They stole my past. They took $1,200,000 that was meant for my school and my future. Then they had the guts to tell me I owed them for a place to live. Every dollar I sent them since I was 21 was pure profit for them. The family trust wasn't a safety net. It was a place to hide the money they stole from me. They used my million to buy their house in Nantucket and pay for my cousin's fancy schools. Then they used my $4,500 monthly payments to keep that lifestyle going. While they sat on my money, I rubbed my eyes. I didn't feel bad. I just saw everything clearly now. This wasn't just a family fight anymore. It was a crime scene. I realized that for 10 years, I wasn't just an unloved niece. I was the victim of a long scam. They didn't just ignore me. They erased who I was just to keep the money coming. I picked up the phone and called the boss at my law firm. I need to file a criminal report, I said. My voice was as cold as a bank statement. We are talking about forgery, stealing an identity, and grand larceny. I looked at the photo of my parents on my desk. For 10 years, I thought I was paying for their mistakes. Now I knew I was the one who was going to make my aunt and uncle pay for theirs. The trap they used on me when I was 21 was finally turning back on them. It was calm, and it was deadly. The rhythmic click of my aunt's designer heels on the marble floor of the firm echoed like a death march. She didn't wait for my assistant to say she was there. She just burst into my office. Her face was a mess of smeared mascara and pure panic. The cocky attitude she had on the boat in Nantucket was totally gone. She looked like a trapped animal now. "Amelia, you have to stop this," she gasped. She was shaking and grabbing the edge of my big desk. The Miller family, the groom's parents, they heard about the audit. They are threatening to cancel the whole wedding unless we prove the money is real. I didn't stand up. I didn't even look away from my computer screen for the first 30 seconds. I let the silence sit there until she started to tremble. When I finally turned my chair to look at her, I didn't see an aunt. I saw a defendant in a criminal case. "The money isn't real, and we both know that now," I said. My voice was as steady as a judge's gavel. She tried to act like she still had power. She pointed a shaking finger at me. "We raised you. We gave you a home when you had nothing. You owe my daughter her fairy tale wedding." I slid a single folder across the desk toward her. Inside was the scan of that life insurance paper with the fake signature. "You didn't give me a home," I told her. "You used 1.2 million of my stolen money to buy yourself a life you couldn't afford." I watched her last bit of old money, pride, just evaporate. She collapsed into the chair and started breathing in short, ragged bursts. I realized then that her whole social life was just a lie she had rented using my hard work and my parents' money without my $4,500 a month and that stolen million. She was just a common thief in a silk dress. "My daughter is innocent," she whispered. Her eyes were red and she was begging. "Don't ruin her life because of a mistake we made years ago." "A mistake is a typo," I replied. I leaned forward until I could see the sweat on her face. "Forging my name to steal over $1 million and then lying to me for 10 years to keep me paying your bills is a criminal business. You're done." I stood up and fixed my blazer. The power had completely shifted. "The Miller family is right to be worried," I said. "A family built on fraud isn't high class, it's a liability. What do you want?" she sobbed. She looked smaller than I ever thought possible. "I've already given my statement to the district attorney," I said. My tone was cold and final. "Here is the end of it. The house in Nantucket is being seized because it was bought with stolen money. You have 48 hours to get out." I walked to the door and held it open for her. "Goodbye. Tell your daughter I hope she finds a dress that doesn't cost someone else's soul." I didn't watch her walk away. I went back to my desk, opened my laptop, and looked at the results of the audit. It was the end of a 10-year debt. The wedding of the decade didn't happen. It just ended in nothing. Within a day of my aunt leaving my office, the Miller family put out a formal statement. They didn't just cancel the party. They cut my aunt's family out of their lives completely. My cousin was left with a designer dress that was now just a white flag of surrender. My aunt and uncle didn't even try to fight the charges. The audit was so detailed that they had no way out. They pleaded guilty to forgery and grand larceny so they wouldn't have to spend a decade in prison. The judge was fast. They were ordered to pay back everything. The $1.02 $2 million from the insurance and the $540,000 I had paid them while they were lying to me. The Nantucket house was the first thing they lost. I watched the auction online from my new office. I saw that place where they called me an outsider get sold for even more than the stolen money. My aunt and uncle moved into a small, cheap apartment on the mainland. They live on a tiny pension that barely covers their lawyers. My cousin, the spoiled girl, had to get a real job for the first time. She finally learned that her luxury life was a debt she never actually paid for. I didn't keep that $1,740,000 just because I wanted to be wealthy. I kept just enough to pay off my student loans and put a down payment on a new home for me and Nathan. The rest of the money, exactly $1,400,000, went straight into a foundation I started. I called it the Horizon Trust. It is a safety net that actually does its job and helps people. We provide legal support and forensic accounting for young people whose families treat them like a source of cash instead of human beings. I want to make sure that no one else has to stay invisible for a decade just because they are afraid of being rejected. Last night, Nathan and I sat on the balcony of our new place and looked at the Chicago skyline. He didn't ask me who I was living for anymore. He knew I was living for myself now. The noise in my head, the lies from my aunt, and the need to be useful is finally gone. It's been replaced by a silence that feels like peace. I used to think I had to pay for my spot at the family table every month, like a subscription to a love that wasn't even real. But being a silent investor for 10 years taught me a big lesson. Your place in a family should never come with a payment plan. Your value isn't measured by how much of yourself you burn to keep other people warm. For 10 years, I lived in a prison I built out of my own silence. I was the black sheep who tried too hard to be a real daughter, only to realize I had the keys to the cage the whole time. I didn't just stop talking, I broke the whole cycle. To anyone listening who feels invisible or who gives until they are empty, hear me. Setting boundaries isn't a betrayal, it is how you survive. Don't let your silence become the cage that keeps you small. It will hurt to walk away from people you love, but I promise you, staying in that silence will hurt way more. The family learned they can't use my kindness anymore, and I learned that the best thing I ever spent money on was finally choosing myself. If this story helped you find the strength to set your own rules, please share it. Don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss our next story about justice. Until next time, take care of yourself. You deserve it.